She had been dead for 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, Madeline Carter saw eternity. She stood before a radiant throne, her soul trembling under the gaze of Jesus Christ himself. His voice echoed through her being, not just with power, but with urgency. "You must return, Madeline. You have a message to deliver." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "A message for whom?" His answer sent a shiver through her soul.
"Donald J. Trump."
And just like that, Madeline gasped. Her spirit pulled violently back into her body. The hospital room around her blurred, filled with the horrified gasps of doctors and nurses. Machines beeped frantically. Madeline Carter had returned from the dead, but she had not come back alone. Madeline remembered the exact moment her heart stopped. The coldness spread through her veins, the beeping of the heart monitor slowed, then silenced. The last thing she heard was the frantic voices of the doctors shouting, "We're losing her!" Then there was nothing. No pain, no fear, just darkness. Then light, blinding, overwhelming light surrounded her. She was floating, weightless yet fully aware. Then she saw him. Jesus Christ stood before her, more radiant than the sun. His eyes were like flames of fire filled with love and authority. His voice shook the very air. "Madeline, you must return. There is a battle ahead, and you are my messenger." She trembled before him. "Why me?" His answer was clear. "Because you were chosen." Then he told her the message, the prophecy, the warning for Donald Trump. The hospital room erupted in chaos. Madeline's body convulsed. Her eyes flew open, glowing with an unnatural light. A nurse screamed. A doctor dropped his clipboard. She sat up, gasping. She's alive," someone shouted. Madeline clutched her chest, her heart pounding harder than ever. Every fiber of her being vibrated with divine energy. The doctors bombarded her with questions, but she had only one thought in her mind. She grabbed the closest nurse's arm. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "I need to speak to Trump." That night, sleep barely came, but when it did, so did the visions. Madeline saw America at a crossroads. A great darkness loomed over the nation, creeping like a shadow with tendrils of fire. She saw demons whispering in the ears of world leaders, their hollow eyes gleaming with malice. And there, standing alone, was Donald Trump, fighting something no one else could see. Then she heard the voice of Jesus again. "Tell him to stand firm. The battle is not of flesh, but of spirit." Madeline woke up screaming. She knew she couldn't ignore this. News of her resurrection spread like wildfire. Some called it a miracle, others a hoax. Social media exploded. Scientists dismissed her story. Skeptics mocked her. Even some church leaders hesitated to take a stance. But Madeline had no time for doubters. She had a mission. How does a 21-year-old girl from Ohio reach one of the most powerful men in the world? She started with emails, letters, and phone calls, each attempt met with silence. Then one night, an anonymous message appeared in her inbox. "Meet me in Dallas. I can get you to him." A dimly lit diner in Dallas. A man in a black suit slid into the seat across from her. "I believe you," he said. Madeline's breath caught. "Who are you?" He ignored the question. "What you saw, it's real. There are forces working against Trump that most people can't even comprehend." Madeline gripped the table. "I need to see him." The man slid her a burner phone. "Follow the instructions exactly. You'll have one shot." Madeline boarded a plane under a false identity. The instructions led her to an undisclosed location outside Palm Beach. Security was tight. Secret Service agents eyed her with suspicion. Then finally, she was led into a grand room. And there he was, Donald J. Trump. Trump studied her, arms crossed. "I was told you have something important to say." Madeline took a deep breath. "Mr. Trump, I died. I met Jesus Christ, and he sent me back with a message for you." His expression didn't change, but the air in the room felt electric. She repeated the prophecy, every word. When she finished, Trump exhaled slowly. "I always knew," he murmured. "I always knew I was meant for something bigger." Jesus' message to Trump wasn't just about politics. It was about the battle for America's soul. Trump leaned forward, his voice low. "What else did he tell you?" Madeline's hands trembled. "Dark forces are moving. They seek to destroy not just you, but everything America was built upon. You must prepare." Trump nodded, his jaw clenched. "I've always known that this was more than just politics." Then suddenly the lights in the room flickered. A deep chill filled the air. Madeline felt a presence, something dark, watching them. "The enemy knows we're talking," she whispered. Trump narrowed his eyes. "Then let them listen." That night, Madeline was woken by another vision. She found herself standing on the edge of a battlefield. Angels and demons clashed in the skies, their swords of fire illuminating the darkness. Then Jesus appeared before her once more, his robe white as snow, his face full of sorrow. "Tell him this," Jesus commanded. "There will come a time when the world will turn against him. Even his closest allies will betray him. But he must not falter. I've anointed him for this hour." Madeline fell to her knees. "Lord, what must I do?" Jesus' eyes bore into hers. "You must stand by him. You must tell the people what you have seen, and you must prepare, for the enemy will come for you next." Then everything went dark. Madeline woke up gasping, her hands trembling. She knew this was no ordinary dream. She had been given a mission, and time was running out. If you're gripped by this divine battle, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The world must hear the truth. The very next day, the attacks began. First, it was the media. Headlines called her a fraud, a liar, a crazy woman seeking attention. Then came the death threats. Her inbox flooded with messages.
You should have stayed dead.
"You're playing with forces you don't understand." But Madeline wasn't afraid. She had seen the face of Jesus. No amount of earthly fear could shake her. Then, something terrifying happened. One night, as she knelt by her bed in prayer, the temperature in her room plummeted. The air grew thick. Something was in the room with her. A deep, guttural voice whispered in her ear, "Stop now, or you'll wish you had never returned." Madeline spun around. Nothing was there, but she could feel it, watching, waiting. She grabbed her Bible, pressing it to her chest. "The Lord rebuke you," she shouted. A horrible screech filled the room, and then it was gone. But Madeline knew this was just the beginning. The next time she saw Trump, his face was different. He wasn't just listening anymore. He believed. "I had a dream," he admitted. "I saw something I can't." Pressed. Trump hesitated. "I was standing on a stage. A great darkness came from the crowd. It tried to pull me down. But then I saw him, a man in white, standing behind me." Madeline's heart pounded. "Jesus." Trump nodded. "He didn't say anything, but I knew he was with me." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. "You have been chosen, Mr. President, and now you know it too." Trump clenched his fists. "Then let's fight." Madeline knew what had to be done. She went public. She took to every platform she could, interviews, podcasts, social media. She told her story, all of it. Some mocked her, others believed. But one thing was clear, the message was spreading. Then, one day, she received a phone call. "You're in danger," the voice said. "They're coming for you." Madeline tightened her grip on the phone. Let them come, because she was ready, and she was not alone. The battle is far from over. Keep reading for the shocking conclusion. Madeline felt the weight of the words, the sheer gravity of the battle she was thrust into. The warnings, the prophecies, Jesus' message was clear. But even more unsettling was the undeniable truth. She wasn't just part of something larger, she was in the eye of the storm. Forces far beyond human comprehension were aligned against her, against Trump, and against the very fabric of what America stood for. As the days passed, Madeline continued her mission. She spoke at rallies, shared her testimony on every media outlet that would have her, and refused to be silenced. The message was too important to be dismissed. America was not just facing a political war, it was in the midst of a spiritual battle. And this battle would determine the future of the nation and perhaps the world. But the attacks kept coming. They came from every direction. The media painted her as a delusional fanatic. Conspiracy theorists claimed she was a puppet in a grand political... Even some members of her own family started to question her sanity. Yet Madeline held firm. Her conviction only grew stronger as she felt the guiding hand of God upon her. Then, one evening, the stakes were raised. Madeline was in her hotel room, reviewing notes for an upcoming interview, when the knock came. It was sharp, unmistakable, a knock that sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, a tall figure in a dark coat stepped in. His face was obscured by shadows, but his presence filled the room with an unnatural chill. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. His gaze alone sent a surge of dread through Madeline's chest. "You're getting too close," the figure finally said, his voice low and rumbling. Madeline squared her shoulders. "To the truth, I'm not afraid of you," the figure smirked. "You should be." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with unnatural strength. "You don't know what you're dealing with, little girl." Voice trembling but resolute. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and I know who's on my side." The figure's smirk faded. "You'll learn soon enough that even the most righteous are not invincible." Before she could respond, the figure stepped back into the shadows, vanishing without a trace. The room felt colder, the air heavier. Madeline's heart raced. She knew she had just come face to face with one of the dark forces Jesus had warned her about. The enemy was closing in, and the final battle was drawing near. The next morning, news broke that a new wave of violence was sweeping across the country. The headlines screamed about escalating unrest, chaos, and division. It was happening. The darkness Jesus had spoken of was manifesting in the streets, in the hearts of men. But there was a glimmer of hope. Madeline had faith that the message would get out, faith that she had been chosen for this purpose. She met with Trump again, this time in a private. He was seated at his desk, looking tired but resolute, his eyes locked with hers.
Madeline,
he said, his voice carrying a heaviness she had never heard before. I've seen it. I've seen what's coming. I know the battle is real, but I don't know if I can do this alone. Madeline placed her hands on the desk. You're not alone. God is with you. You've been chosen for this hour, and together we will stand against the darkness. Trump nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Then let's do it. Let's fight. In that moment, something shifted. Madeline could feel it. The spiritual energy in the room crackled, the presence of divine power filling the space between them. They weren't just two individuals anymore. They were part of something much larger, a force that could not be defeated. Madeline left the meeting with renewed purpose. She was ready for whatever came next. She knew the enemy would strike harder, more viciously than ever before. But she also knew that the final victory belonged to God, and so the battle raged on. Days turned into weeks, and the stakes only grew higher. Madeline faced attacks from all sides, but her resolve never wavered. She leaned on her faith, her connection to Christ, and the unwavering belief that she was part of something far bigger than herself. Then came the moment she had been dreading, the enemy's final move. One night, as she sat in her apartment, preparing for yet another round of interviews, she heard it again, the knock. But this time it was not a stranger in a dark coat. This time it was someone she knew. Donald Trump himself walked into the room, his face grim. Madeline, they've taken everything from me, he said, his voice filled with exhaustion. My allies, my friends, they've all turned against me. Madeline's heart sank. No, Mr. Trump, this is the moment. The enemy thinks they've won, but they haven't seen the power of God. They haven't seen the angels that are fighting on our side. Trump looked at her, eyes full of both despair and hope. I've seen them. I've seen the angels. But I'm starting to believe it might not be enough. Madeline took his hands in hers, her voice firm. It's more than enough. Together we will fight, and we will win. Just as she spoke those words, a violent tremor shook the building. The lights flickered. A cold, malevolent presence filled the air, chilling them to the bone. They were not alone. The final battle had begun. The tremor shook the room harder, rattling the windows and knocking items off the shelves. The temperature plummeted, and for a split second, the world around them felt as though it had slipped into another realm. Madeline's heart raced as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and writhe, moving with a life of their own. Trump stood frozen, his eyes wide with fear, but also a fire she had never seen before. He gripped her hands tightly as though drawing strength from her resolve. The air grew thick, oppressive. Something was coming. Madeline's pulse thundered in her ears, but she refused to let fear take root. She had seen the power of God. She had been entrusted with a mission, and she would not falter. It's happening, Madeline whispered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. The enemy knows we're ready. Suddenly the room seemed to pulse, the shadows taking form, creatures twisted in shape, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly malice. They surrounded them, inching closer, the darkness pressing in from every side. Madeline's breath caught in her throat as one of the figures stepped forward, a tall, twisted creature draped in black robes. Its eyes were like voids, sucking in all light and hope. Its voice was low, guttural, like the whisper of 1,000 lost souls. You cannot win, it hissed. This world belongs to us. Your God is weak, and his time is over. Trump's jaw tightened. You don't know who you're dealing with, he growled. I know who stands behind. The creature sneered. Your God is no match for the coming storm. The chaos is already here. You are nothing but pawns in a game you cannot win. Madeline stepped forward, her hands trembling with divine power. The words of Jesus rang in her ears, the message clear. Stand firm, for the battle is not of flesh, but of spirit. She raised her hands, her voice rising in a prayer, a call to the heavenly realms. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave. You have no dominion here. The shadows around them recoiled, as though they'd been struck by a blow. The creature's twisted smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing its face. Trump, too, took a step forward, his voice fierce. You will not take this country. Not while I stand here. Not while God stands with me. The creature's eyes flashed with rage, and the room shook violently, as though the very foundation of the earth was being torn apart. The darkness thickened, pressing in from every direction. Madeline's heart hammered in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had come back for this. She'd been chosen for this moment. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted in the room, so bright it seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. The shadows screamed, recoiling in terror as the light consumed everything around them. And there, standing at the center of the radiance, was a figure unlike any they had seen before. Tall, majestic, with eyes full of eternal power. Jesus Christ. His presence filled the room, overwhelming everything in its path. The creature shrieked, retreating into the darkness, vanishing into the void with a final, desperate cry. Trump fell to his knees, his hands shaking, his face flooded with awe. Madeline stood, breathless, as Jesus gazed at them both. "You have done well," Jesus said, his voice both gentle and commanding. "But the battle is far from over. The darkness will return, and it will be stronger than before. You must be prepared." Trump's voice was barely a whisper. "How, Lord? How can we stand against such evil?" Jesus' gaze softened. "You are not alone. You have the power of the Holy Spirit within you, but you must stand firm. The world will turn against you, but I have anointed you for this hour. Do not falter." Madeline felt the weight of his words, and in that moment, a surge of divine strength filled her chest. The darkness, though temporarily defeated, would return. But now, she knew they were ready. The message had been delivered. The war had only just begun. Jesus' figure began to fade, his final words lingering in the air, "Do not fear, for I am with you, even to the end of the age." The room returned to normal, the light fading, the oppressive presence lifting, but the heaviness in the air remained, as though the very atmosphere was charged with an impending storm. Trump and Madeline exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They were not merely survivors, they were warriors in a battle that transcended anything they could have imagined. "We fight now," Madeline said, her voice steady and filled with unwavering conviction. Trump nodded. "We fight together." The darkness would return, but they were no longer afraid. With Jesus behind them, they were ready for whatever came next. The battle for America's soul had only just begun, and they would not stop until victory was theirs. The world, as it was, would never be the same again, and neither would they. Years passed, but the fire that had been ignited in Madeline and Trump never waned. The battle for America's soul had raged on, but as the darkness grew stronger, so did the light. Madeline, now a beacon of unwavering faith, had become a symbol of resilience to millions. She had witnessed the unfolding of prophecies, the rise of enemies, and the stand of heroes. But through it all, she never wavered. The world had changed in ways no one could have predicted, yet Madeline knew one thing: the message she carried, the words spoken by Jesus himself, would never be silenced. In those quiet moments, in the stillness of her home, Madeline would often look out over the land she had fought for, the land she had been sent to protect. America, with all its chaos and turmoil, had endured, and she knew in her heart that, despite everything, the battle was not truly over. But it was one step closer to being won. Trump had stepped down from office years before, a reluctant leader who had been forever changed by the journey. The world had turned its back on him, yet he held his head high. He had stood firm in the face of betrayal, enduring attacks that seemed designed to destroy him. Yet with every blow, his faith grew stronger. Madeline's relationship with him had transformed. No longer just a messenger, she had become a friend, a confidant, a sister in arms. They spoke of the future often, of a world that was both broken and beautiful, of a people who still had the power to rise above the darkness. But there was always one truth that hung between them, a truth that neither of them could deny. They had been chosen, and they had completed the mission. One afternoon, after years of relentless campaigning, interviews, and fighting in the spiritual and political arenas, Madeline found herself standing before the very same throne she had stood before all those years ago. But this time, the figure before her was not just the mighty Jesus Christ. It was him, the one who had called her back into the world, who had told her to stand firm. His eyes were filled with love, but there was an overwhelming sadness there as well. "You did well, Madeline," he said, his voice tender. "You and your brother, Donald. You have fought the good fight." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes as she fell to her knees. "It was so hard, Lord. The attacks, the lies, the betrayal. I didn't think I could make it." He smiled gently, kneeling before her. "You did not make it alone. I was with you, just as I have always been. And now I am calling you home." Madeline's heart soared. She knew the time had come. Her mission was complete. She had delivered the message. She had fought the darkness with every ounce of her being, never letting it consume her, never letting it steal the light. But as her eyes filled with tears, she felt a deep, overwhelming peace. She had given everything, her body, her soul, her life. She had fought for the future of a nation, for the souls of countless people. And in the end, she knew that victory had been achieved. "I am ready," she whispered. And with that, the light enveloped her and she felt herself being drawn upward. The weight of the world fell away, replaced by an unexplainable peace, a peace beyond anything she had ever known. As she ascended, she felt a presence beside her, Donald Trump, standing beside her in the realm of eternity. He looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude, sorrow, and understanding. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Madeline smiled softly, knowing that the battle they had fought together had not been in vain. She had given everything for this moment, everything for the future of the country, for the people who would rise from the ashes of their struggles. And as she stepped into the radiant presence of the one who had called her, Madeline Carter knew without a doubt that she had fulfilled her purpose. Her work on earth was done, but in the eternal realm she had only just begun. The battle for America's soul had been fierce, but the light had won, and Madeline, the messenger of Christ, had been its living testament. Her mission, though over, would echo through the ages, for the truth she had carried would never fade. It would endure, and the victory would be remembered forever.